Chapter 3. The Man Who Walked Away. The flashbulbs were like a physical assault, a barrage of silent, blinding explosions that erased all nuance from the room, leaving only stark black and white. I stood at the podium, a grim monolith in a sea of predatory lenses and hungry microphones. The air was thick with the scent of recycled air, damp wool coats, and a collective, almost feral impatience. This was the press conference I had been forced to call regarding the Trinity Tragedy, and it was to be the final public act of my career. I cleared my throat, the sound swallowed by the restless shuffling of the press corps. After a thorough and exhaustive preliminary investigation, I began, my voice a carefully modulated instrument of calm I did not feel. There is currently no discernible evidence to suggest coordinated foul play in the tragic deaths of Arthur, Elliot, and Damien Marquez. The initial findings point towards 3 separate, albeit statistically improbable, fatal events. A beat of stunned silence, and then the chaos erupted. A dozen hands shot into the air, shouted questions overlapped into an indecipherable roar. I pointed to a severe-looking woman in the front row from a major news network. "Inspector," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory, "are you seriously asking the world to believe that 3 brothers, all titans of industry, were killed by a coincidence, by a statistical improbability?" "I am not asking you to believe anything, madam," I replied, my hands gripping the sides of the lectern. "The law of large numbers dictates that even events with astronomically low probabilities will, given enough opportunities, eventually occur. We have found no human agent, no conventional weapon, no financial trail, nothing to link these 3 tragedies beyond the unfortunate intersection of chance." Another journalist, a younger man with the hungry eyes of a tabloid writer, didn't wait to be called on. "What about the whispers from the Marquez family, Inspector, the ones calling for your resignation? Do they believe in chance? Or do they believe, as many do, that you are simply incompetent?" The word hung in the air, a deliberate poison dart. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. The family is grieving. Their anger is understandable. My competence, however, is a matter for the Home Office, not for public speculation. "Then what about Elliot Marquez's last words?" a voice boomed from the back. "He spoke to an empty chair. He saw a young man. Is that also chance? Or is this a cover-up? Are you hiding something?" I looked out at the sea of faces, skeptical, cynical, desperate not for the truth, but for a simple story, a villain they could name and a motive they could understand. And in their eyes I saw the reflection of my own impossible position. I was a man of logic, trying to explain a miracle, or an anti-miracle, to a congregation that had already decided it was heresy. They didn't want the complex, terrifying answer that the universe might simply be irrational. They wanted a conspiracy. They wanted a culprit. They wanted the comfort of a world that still made sense. And I could not give it to them. I saw the abyss between their world and the one I now perceived. It was unbridgeable. To continue would be to lie, to invent a fiction, to placate them, and that was a line I would not cross. My entire life had been a rejection of comforting fictions. I leaned into the microphone one last time. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "Thank you.
I turned and walked off the stage, leaving their shouts and accusations behind me. That was the last time I faced the cameras, the last time I tried to explain the unexplainable. And so the curtains are drawn, not because it's dark outside. The faint, persistent glow of London's perpetual twilight seeps around their heavy velvet edges, but because I don't want to be seen, or, more accurately, I have cultivated a profound disinterest in seeing what the world has become, and an even stronger desire to prevent it from seeing me in my current state of repose. The world out there, beyond these carefully maintained barriers, still breathes with a rhythm I distantly recall. Tires hiss on wet asphalt, a sound that once promised the arrival of a client or the departure of a pursued suspect. The intermittent, hopeful buzz of the baker's neon sign down the street, a beacon of mundane commerce in a city increasingly punctuated by the unexplainable. Children laugh in the small park opposite, their mirth high and untroubled, like they've never been lied to, like the foundations of their reality are still solid bedrock and not the shifting sands I've come to perceive. But in here, inside this Mayfair flat that once served as both my sanctuary and my command center, time has grown tired, heavy. The air is thick with the invisible sediment of unspoken thoughts, the ghosts of old victories, and the lingering scent of my particular brand of pipe tobacco, a habit I've been unable to entirely relinquish, much like my stubborn attachment to outdated methodologies. My name, or rather the name I presented to the world for professional purposes, still hangs on a discreet brass plaque above the outer door, a silent sentinel guarding an empty post. Miles Finch, private investigator.
But the sign, like so much else these days, is a lie, a relic. There hasn't been a new case in months, not a genuine one, anyway. A few tentative inquiries, easily dismissed, a paranoid spouse convinced their partner was communicating with extraterrestrials via a toaster, a collector certain his prize-winning petunias were being systematically replaced by identical yet subtly malevolent alien flora, the usual detritus of a society losing its collective mind, but no true knocks from those seeking answers to comprehensible crimes, no urgent phone calls piercing the carefully cultivated stillness, just the low, companionable hum of the electric kettle, my most frequent confidant these days, and the occasional, tastefully muted obituary in the Times for a world I used to understand, a world whose rules, however bent, were at least discernible. My desk, a grand mahogany affair inherited from a great-uncle who fancied himself a man of letters, was once a battlefield of brilliant puzzles, a landscape of human folly and cunning laid bare. Now it's a museum of obsolescence. Dossiers, their buff manila covers yellowing at the edges, detail cases that once seemed the pinnacle of complexity, but now feel like quaint parlor games. Headlines, clipped and carefully archived, triumphs that taste like ash in my memory. Finch solves Mayfair jewel theft. The Belgravia blackmailers routed by lone investigator. A cracked magnifying glass, its lens chipped during a rather violent confrontation with a forger in a dimly lit warehouse in Shadwell, serves as a reminder of a time when physical evidence was paramount, when a stray fiber or a partial fingerprint could unlock the most labyrinthine of secrets. And at the center of this curated decay, framed in heavy, dark wood and tarnished brass, sits the photograph. Me,
A younger, leaner version, hair still more dark than silver, standing beside a beaming Home Secretary. I'm wearing the long grey wool coat that became something of a trademark, shaking his hand firmly after solving the Glasgow disappearance, a case involving a missing shipping magnate that had confounded Scotland Yard for a full decade. I found him not through some arcane insight, but by noticing a subtle anomaly in the tidal charts for the Firth of Clyde, cross-referencing it with the unusual wear patterns on the tires of his abandoned motor car, leading me to a remote, disused fisherman's hut, where he'd been meticulously planning his escape from crippling debts and a disastrous marriage. Logic, observation, deduction, the holy trinity of my former faith.
They used to call me the mind that couldn't be fooled, Fleet Street's finest in their more charitable moments, an emblem of intellectual rigor I once wore with a certain quiet pride. But now, staring into the gathering gloom of my self-imposed exile, I suspect I have been fooled for quite some time. Perhaps my entire career was built on observing a very particular, very stable, and ultimately transient slice of reality. The unraveling, the great disillusionment, started slowly, as all systemic failures do. Not with a bang, but with a series of almost imperceptible whispers, unsettling deviations from the expected script. A witness, under oath and utterly convinced of their recall, misremembering the color of a getaway car so fundamentally, claiming it was bright yellow when multiple traffic cameras clearly showed it to be dark blue, that perjury seemed the only explanation. Yet their sincerity was unshakable. A suspect, a seemingly unremarkable clerk accused of embezzlement, vanishing from a police interrogation room, a room meticulously searched, its single door locked from the outside, its windows sealed, with no hidden exits, no conceivable escape route, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and two bewildered constables. These were initially dismissed as aberrations, moments of human error or particularly cunning, if inexplicable, trickery. Then came bigger things, more audacious impossibilities. Cases that unraveled like poorly knitted sweaters, where pulling on a single thread of evidence caused the entire fabric of the investigation to disintegrate. Evidence that flagrantly, violently refuted itself. A murder weapon, a unique antique dagger, found simultaneously in the suspect's London flat and by another police team acting on an anonymous tip embedded in an oak tree 50 miles away in the Kent countryside. Both locations processed with impeachable forensic diligence. Fingerprints at a crime scene belonging to a man confirmed to have been cremated 3 years prior. Coincidences too precise, too mathematically improbable to be mere coincidence. A string of jewel thefts across Europe, where the dates and times, when converted to coordinated universal time, formed a perfect Fibonacci sequence. I spent weeks trying to find a pattern, a central node, a human hand behind the chaos. The technological expertise required was staggering, but the sheer synchronicity suggested something beyond even the most sophisticated algorithm. It felt less like a crime, and more like the market itself had developed a malevolent sentience. The case was never solved. It simply stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving a trail of financial ruin and baffled regulators. It was one of the first times I felt that icy touch of the truly incomprehensible, the sense of grappling with forces that didn't play by any human rules. And then came the Trinity.
That case didn't just beat me, it mocked me.
It took my entire system of belief, my lifetime of honed skills, and ground them into dust. 3 men, the Marquez brothers, 3 deaths. Damien in Zermatt, a lightning bolt from a cloudless sky. Elliot in Tokyo, choking while addressing an empty chair he seemed to perceive as occupied by a young man, his last words an incoherent jest. Arthur off the coast of Capri, his heart stopping as he watched something unseen fall from an equally clear sky. 3 different continents, 3 meticulously documented yet utterly bizarre scenarios, all at the exact micro-instant. Clean, clinical, impossible. I chased the logic until it slipped between my fingers, like vapor, like the steam from my neglected teacup. I interviewed witnesses until their patience frayed and their stories began to contradict even themselves under the weight of my relentless, desperate questioning. I pored over meteorological data, seismic reports, medical histories, financial records, satellite imagery. Nothing. A perfect, impenetrable vacuum of rational explanation. As if the universe itself had committed the crime and then calmly, silently erased all its tracks. So I quit. Not out of shame, though the public humiliation was a bitter pill, a relentless barrage of headlines branding me Finch the flummoxed and worse. No, it was, I told myself, an act of clarity, a recognition of limits. My tools, my very way of thinking, were designed for a world that it seemed no longer existed. You can't solve a riddle that obeys no rules, that changes its parameters mid-game. You can't play chess against an opponent who can teleport their king, transmute their pawns into queens at will, and, occasionally, for reasons unknown, cause the board itself to liquefy.
There are 2 kinds of silence in a man's life, I've come to believe. The kind he chooses, the deliberate withdrawal from the cacophony, the seeking of solace in stillness. And then there is the kind that chooses him, an encroaching emptiness that slowly, inexorably smothers the familiar sounds of his existence. I used to think I preferred the former, the architect of my own quietude. Lately, contemplating the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light that penetrate my self-imposed gloom, I'm not so sure. This silence feels less like a sanctuary and more like a siege. Tonight, like many others that have blurred into a monotonous procession, I sit by the fireplace, a modest gas affair that offers little of the comfort of real flames. A tumbler of Lagavulin net rests on the small mahogany table beside my worn leather armchair. The radio, an old valve model I cherish for its warm, slightly distorted tone, hums some ghost of jazz, a mournful saxophone weaving a lament for lost loves and forgotten speakeasies. I tell myself I am content, that this quiet dignity is a hard-won peace, that silence, after a life spent dissecting the clamor of human deceit, can be earned like a pension. But the truth, a slippery and unwelcome companion, is that the silence taunts me. It has teeth. It whispers questions with no answers, echoes of cases that remain stubbornly open in the filing cabinets of my mind, faces with no names, victims whose stories were never fully told, perpetrators who slipped through the net of justice, or perhaps were never truly within its grasp, motives with no meaning, acts of such senseless violence or bewildering strangeness that they defied any human understanding of cause and consequence. The Trinity, of course, looms largest, a tripartite Kerberos guarding the gates of my intellectual despair. What did Elliot Marquez see in that empty chair? What phantom did Arthur Marquez watch fall from the sky? Why lightning, of all things, for Damien, the technologist? The questions circle, vultures over a dying certainty.
I turn the dial on the radio, seeking something soothing, a Brahms intermezzo, perhaps, or the comforting cadences of the World Service newsreader, detailing geopolitical squabbles that, for all their gravity, still adhere to a recognizable, if often brutal, human logic. Instead, I land mid-broadcast on a panel show, the plummy tones of a BBC moderator attempting to corral a group of excitable academics. Two physicists and a philosopher, if I'm not mistaken, are debating with surprising fervor whether consciousness is strictly local to the electrochemical processes of the brain, or if it might be, as one of them postulates with an almost evangelical zeal, entangled across space-time, a non-local phenomenon participating in a universal quantum field. I find myself emitting a short, dry bark of laughter, not because it's intrinsically funny, but because the very idea, articulated in a public forum with such seriousness, would have gotten you quietly escorted to a padded room 30 years ago, or at the very least dismissed as a purveyor of sherry-fueled late-night metaphysics. Now it's just Tuesday night radio, another brick dislodged from the crumbling facade of the consensus reality I once navigated with such confidence. The unthinkable, it seems, is well on its way to becoming the commonplace. I listen for a few more minutes, fascinated and repelled in equal measure. They speak of Heisenberg's theorem, of transactional interpretations of quantum mechanics, of pilot waves and emergent realities. It's a language I barely comprehend, yet it hints at the very abyss that swallowed my career. I switch it off abruptly, the sudden silence feeling even more profound, more accusatory. That's when I hear it, or rather, feel it. Not a knock. I would recognize the sharp, percussive intrusion of knuckles on oak. My senses, though dulled by routine and single malt, are still preternaturally attuned to the subtle disturbances of my immediate environment. This is different. A whisper, a shift in the atmospheric pressure within the room, so subtle it might be mistaken for the house settling or a change in the wind outside. But there is no wind tonight. The city air is unnervingly still.
The clock on the mantelpiece, a prized antique, an original Breguet pendulum clock, a gift from a grateful French ambassador whose errant daughter I located in a rather unsavory Marrakesh kasbah some years ago, twitches. Not its meticulously balanced hands, which continue their steady, inexorable sweep. Its face. The convex glass covering the enamel dial for a fleeting, impossible moment fogs up. A patch of condensation, ephemeral as a heartbeat, forms and dissipates in the space of a heartbeat. As if someone or something invisible had leaned in close, perhaps to check the time, and exhaled. Then, nothing. Just the rhythmic, sonorous ticking, a sound that has been the metronome of my solitude for years. I stare at it, the glass of scotch halfway to my lips. My mind, that old reliable engine of reason, immediately begins to cycle through explanations. A sudden localized fluctuation in humidity, a minute thermal variation caused by a draft I hadn't perceived, the outgassing of ancient wood in the clock case, all plausible, all insufficient to explain the peculiar intimacy of that fleeting breath stain. I rise, walk over to the mantel, and examine the clock minutely. No drafts. The room is sealed, almost hermetically. The humidity is constant. I touch the glass. Cool, unremarkable. I stand there for a long time, the silence of the room pressing in, the ticking of the breguet now sounding unnervingly loud, almost deliberate. And then I notice the letter. It hadn't been there before. I would have sworn it on a stack of legal statutes. My desk, though a museum, is a meticulously ordered one. I have a place for everything, and an almost pathological awareness of any deviation from that order. This letter, a crisp, cream-colored rectangle, lies precisely in the center of my otherwise clear blotter, directly under the faint light cast by my green-shaded banker's lamp. Sealed with a dollop of black wax, impressed with a sigil I don't immediately recognize, something intricate, vaguely astronomical. No stamp, no address, no indication of how it breached the sanctity of my locked flat past the formidable bolts and chains that are more a product of habit than any real fear of intrusion. My heart, an organ I generally prefer to ignore, gives an unwelcome lurch. This is not the work of a common housebreaker, nor the prank of a bored youth. There's a precision here, a theatricality that speaks of a different order of intelligence. With fingers that feel suddenly clumsy, I pick up the letter. The paper is of high quality, heavy stock. The seal cracks with a small, sharp report as I break it. I unfold the single sheet. The script is elegant, an italic hand that suggests both intellect and a certain artistic sensibility. Printed, not handwritten. And I read.
To the man who hunted certainty, Mr. Miles Finch. I hope you will forgive the drama of this delivery, but I suspected you might not open a standard envelope. Not any more. Not after what the world, in its relentless pursuit of incomprehensibility, did to your reputation, and perhaps to your spirit. Or perhaps I should say what the world became, despite your most valiant efforts to keep it tethered to the shores of reason. I've followed your career with more than casual interest since I was 17. You were unexpectedly the subject of a guest lecture I once snuck into, an Oxford criminology seminar,
I, as a rather single-minded undergraduate physics student, had no official business attending. The professor, a venerable gentleman with a fondness for hyperbole, described you as the last great detective still governed by Newtonian rules in an increasingly Einsteinian, if not downright quantum, underworld. I remember thinking at the time that was meant as high praise, a testament to your unwavering adherence to classical logic. Now I see the tragic irony. Newtonian rules, Mr. Finch, for all their robust beauty in describing the macroscopic dance of planets and projectiles, are insufficient. A charmingly quaint approximation, perhaps, for the true, far stranger mechanics that underpin existence, especially now.
You were right about the Trinity. Utterly, profoundly right. You were right to doubt the official causes, the glib dismissals, the desperate scramble for mundane explanations. And you were not mad for doing so, despite what the baying hounds of the popular press and the craven pronouncements of certain official bodies might have implied. The patterns you chased, scattered, faint, maddeningly inconsistent, they were patterns, just not the kind that can be traced with luminol and fingerprint powder or deduced from conventional motive and opportunity. They were echoes of a deeper, more fundamental order, or disorder. I am not a detective, Mr. Finch. I wouldn't know where to begin to search for the hidden knife, nor could I decipher what the butler might have overheard at 3 a.m. My expertise lies elsewhere, in the realm of the very small, the very strange, the probabilistic heart of reality itself. But I understand, or am beginning to understand, the fabric of that reality and the increasingly porous boundary between the potential and the actual. I've spent the last 5 years, much of it in professional isolation similar to your own, working on a theoretical framework and indeed a device that— No, that is perhaps premature. Let's just say I've been studying the nature of cause and effect and the increasingly porous boundary between the potential and the actual. That fleeting breath you saw on your clock's glass a few moments ago, it wasn't a trick of the light nor a symptom of your understandable solitude. It happened because I knew it would, because I, in a manner of speaking, observed it into a state of transient actuality from a field of probabilities. A small demonstration, if you will. If that statement means nothing to you, if it strikes you as the ravings of yet another deluded soul, then by all means throw this letter into the nearest grate. Add it to the pyre of your lost certainties. No judgment will be coming from this quarter. But if you are still, deep down, the man who cannot abide a dangling thread, the intellect that recoils from an unsolved mystery as from a physical blow, then meet me. I won't beg. My own reserves of professional pride are not inconsiderable. But I believe with a conviction that transcends mere hope that we can solve the Trinity. Together. Perhaps even understand the forces that orchestrated it. Dr. Aldous Quentin, theoretical quantum physicist, formerly of Oxford University, and currently a fellow traveler in the land of the inexplicable.
The letter falls from my hand, fluttering to the threadbare Persian rug like a wounded bird. Not from disbelief. Disbelief is a luxury I can no longer afford. It's a vestige of that older, simpler world. No, this is something worse. Recognition. A cold, sickening lurch in the pit of my stomach, the kind I used to feel when the disparate pieces of a particularly hideous crime suddenly snapped into a coherent, monstrous whole. There was a breath on the glass. I saw it. I felt that subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the room's atmosphere. I had, in the intervening minutes, already begun the familiar process of rationalizing it away, of filing it under unexplained but ultimately trivial atmospheric phenomena. Chalked it up to age, to the mind playing tricks in solitude, to drafts in the ancient floorboards. Standard operating procedure for a man trying to maintain his sanity in a world that seemed intent on stripping it from him. But he wrote it before it happened, or more chillingly, he knew it would happen, as he wrote it or as the letter was delivered by means I couldn't begin to fathom. And that terrifies me more than any unsolved murder, more than any locked-room mystery I ever confronted. Because I have never, not for one moment in my life, believed in magic, in parlor tricks, in supernatural intervention. My entire worldview is predicated on a universe governed by immutable, if complex, laws. But I do believe in precision, in control, in the meticulous execution of a plan. And whatever this was, this subtle manipulation of my environment, this impossible foreknowledge, this theatrical delivery, it was surgical, controlled. The sort of thing you don't idly guess will happen unless you've already mapped its inevitability, or, more disturbingly, orchestrated its occurrence. A Calabe Yau manifold, I vaguely recall the term from some popular science article, something to do with string theory, extra dimensions, a private jest indeed. I stare again at the antique Breguet clock, its brass and glass gleaming softly in the lamplight, and this time I watch it not as a mere timepiece, but as if it might blink, as if it's an accomplice. Somewhere behind me, in the heavy crystal tumbler, the expensive Scotch sweats, forgotten. The silence in the room no longer feels like mine. It feels occupied, observed. The question of whether to meet this Dr. Aldous Quentin is really not a question at all, is it? For a man like me, a man defined by the hunt, to ignore such a gauntlet, such a profound and personal challenge to the very core of my being, would be a final surrender. It would be an admission that Miles Finch is well and truly dead, a mere ghost haunting the relics of his former life. And I am not dead yet, merely dormant. The Trinity. He believes we can solve it. The thought, absurd and audacious as it is, sends a flicker, faint but undeniable, through the ashes of my ambition. To understand. Perhaps that is the last and most fundamental human need, more than peace, more than certainty. Just to understand.